The mother-in-law came to visit the grandchildren, not knowing that her son had abandoned the family for another woman. But when she entered the house, her face changed. Linda had always been the kind of grandmother who never let months go by without seeing her grandchildren. It had been nearly 6 months since she last hugged Liam and Sophie, far too long in her opinion. So she decided to surprise them with a light heart and 2 neatly wrapped boxes in her bag. One with a puzzle for Liam and another with a storybook for Sophie. She boarded the bus toward her son's city. The trip took nearly 3 hours, but Linda didn't mind. The idea of seeing the joy on her grandchildren's faces, hearing their laughter echo in the hallway, and watching them run to her with arms wide open was enough to make the hours fly by. Thomas, her only son, had always lived a few cities away with his wife Emily and their children. Linda had always thought of their family as stable, ordinary, even. Not perfect. Of course, what family was? But Emily had always been polite, the kids well-mannered, and Thomas a provider, busy with his job but present enough. There had been no hint in their last conversation that anything was wrong. In fact, Thomas had been brief, a bit distracted maybe, but that wasn't unusual given the demands of his career. The closer she got to their neighborhood, the more memories bubbled to the surface. She remembered helping Thomas and Emily move into that very house when they first married. She remembered painting the nursery when Emily was pregnant with Liam, laughing as Thomas got blue paint in his hair. All those sweet memories gave Linda a sense of rootedness, a sense of belonging. As she stepped off the bus and walked the final few blocks, the August sun cast long shadows across the pavement. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet for a house with children. She approached the house with spring in her step, adjusting her blouse and brushing invisible dust off her skirt. When she reached the door, she knocked twice and took a step back, expecting to hear the shuffle of little feet, a dog barking, something. But the house remained silent. She knocked again, louder this time. After a few long seconds, the door creaked open just a little, revealing Emily's face. Her hair was tied back hastily, and her skin looked pale, almost gray under the porch light. There were deep shadows beneath her eyes, and her lips were dry and cracked. "Linda," she said, her voice flat, caught between surprise and confusion. Linda blinked. "Emily, I thought I'd surprise the kids. I've missed them so much. Are they home?" Emily didn't answer right away. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the door. Behind her, the hallway was dim, and there was no sign of the usual chaos that accompanied 2 young children. No toys scattered on the floor, no cartoons playing in the background, no footsteps. Just silence. Linda's cheerful expression faltered. "Is everything all right?" Emily opened the door a bit wider, her movement stiff. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside. As Linda entered the house, she felt a chill run down her spine. The living room was in disarray. Not messy in a playful, lived-in way, but chaotic in a neglected one. Papers piled on the coffee table. A half-empty cup of cold tea sat on the mantel. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the afternoon light. Linda placed the gift bags on the couch and turned to Emily, her voice gentle but firm. "Where's Thomas?" Emily's eyes flicked away. She reached down to pick up a toy truck and set back on the shelf, but her hands trembled. "He's not here." Linda tried to smile, to make light of the tension she was beginning to feel. "Out getting groceries? At work?" Emily shook her head, slowly, as if each movement required effort. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and then looked Linda straight in the eye. Her expression was exhausted, her words nearly a whisper. "He left." Linda frowned. "Left? What do you mean?" Emily's shoulders sagged. She looked 10 years older than the last time Linda had seen her. "He's gone, Linda. He walked out. Months ago." Linda stared at her, the words not making sense. "What do you mean he walked out?" Emily looked toward the hallway, as if checking to make sure no little ears were listening. "He's not coming back." A long silence stretched between them. Linda felt like the floor had shifted. Her mind tried to rationalize, tried to build a narrative that would make this make sense. Maybe they'd had a fight. Maybe Thomas was working out of town. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. But nothing about Emily's face suggested misunderstanding. Only exhaustion. Only pain. Thomas wouldn't just leave, Linda said, though even her own ears it sounded hollow. Emily's voice dropped even lower. He did. He left me. He left us. Linda took a step back, bracing herself against the edge of the kitchen counter. Her heart pounded in her ears. I don't understand, she said. I didn't either, Emily replied. Not at first. The two women stood in the dimly lit room, the silence between them now heavy with things unsaid. And just as Linda tried to ask the question forming on her lips, Emily turned away, blinking back something. He's gone, Linda, and he's not coming back. Emily stood in the doorway for a moment longer, her hand pressed against the frame as if she needed support just to remain upright. Linda's heart thudded in her chest, the echo of Emily's words still ringing in her ears. He's gone. The sentence felt too heavy, too final, and yet Emily had spoken it with such weariness that Linda couldn't find space for denial. The house itself seemed to confirm it. Every corner of the room looked drained of life, as though laughter had been extracted from its walls. There were toys neatly pushed against one side of the living room, not scattered as Linda remembered them being. It was as if the children had been instructed not to make noise, not to leave traces of their existence. Linda lowered herself slowly onto the couch, her body heavy with confusion. Emily, I don't understand. Where are Liam and Sophie? I thought I'd hear them running around as soon as I came in. Emily's lips trembled. She closed the door softly, careful not to let it slam. They're in their rooms. It's been a hard few weeks. They don't play like they used to. She tried to steady her voice, but it cracked as she finished. Linda's instinct was to jump up and rush to the children, to hold them in her arms immediately, but she hesitated. Emily's exhaustion was evident in every movement. The younger woman looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. Her hair, which was usually neat, now clung in loose strands to her temples. Even her clothes were mismatched, thrown on without thought. Emily, sit down, Linda urged, patting the armchair across from her. Emily obeyed reluctantly, lowering herself as if her body weighed too much. For a long while, silence filled the room. Linda broke it carefully. I don't mean to pry, but tell me the truth. Where exactly is Thomas? Did he move for work? Did something happen? Emily pressed her fingers together tightly, staring at them as though they held the answer. Then she lifted her eyes, filled with something that looked like both shame and anger. Linda, he isn't away for work. He isn't coming back. He made his choice. The words made Linda's stomach twist. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. Made his choice? What do you mean? Emily gave a bitter, humorless laugh, quickly cut short as though laughter were a luxury she couldn't afford. I shouldn't be the one telling you this. He should have called, or written, or at least explained. But of course he didn't. Her voice broke on the last word. She looked away, focusing on a photograph on the mantel, the family portrait they had taken 3 years ago at the county fair. Thomas's arm was around her shoulders, the children smiling wide in front of them. The sight seemed to mock her. Linda swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. I need you to tell me, Emily. Please. Emily finally faced her, her eyes glassy. Thomas left us. He walked out one evening after dinner and didn't return. I thought at first it was a business trip, because that's what he said, that he'd be away for a few days. But those days stretched into weeks. Then one morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside, there was nothing but a short note. No apology. No explanation beyond that he wasn't happy, that he'd found someone else. Linda's throat tightened. She struggled to breathe as the words sank in. She had come expecting joy, laughter, the familiar sound of little voices calling Grandma. Instead, she was being handed shards of betrayal she didn't know how to hold. I kept hoping it was a mistake, Emily continued, her voice trembling. I tried calling him, sending messages. At first he ignored me. Then he answered once, and he was cold, distant. He said he'd met someone and that he wasn't coming back. That was it. He hasn't spoken to the kids since. She clasped her hands tightly on her lap, her knuckles pale. 3 months, Linda. 3 months since they heard their father's voice. The words struck Linda like stones. She pressed her hand against her chest, forcing herself not to collapse under the weight of them. 3 months, she whispered, almost to herself. Yes, Emily said, her tone flat now, as if repeating the fact had drained her the last bit of strength. 3 months. Bills piling up. Liam asking every night if Daddy's coming home. Sophie crying when she sees other kids with their fathers. And me. She shook her head, staring at the floor. Me, holding everything together with tape and string. Linda stared at her daughter-in-law, her heart torn between denial and grief. I don't believe it. Thomas wouldn't just abandon you. He's my son. He loves his children. Emily gave a long, tired sigh. I thought so too. But people change, Linda. Sometimes in ways we don't want to believe. She leaned back in the chair, her eyes closing briefly. The room grew heavier. Linda's thoughts swirled, desperate to land on something concrete. Something that would make sense of the mess unraveling in front of her. She wanted to defend her son, to cling to the image of him as the boy she had raised, the man she believed him to be. But the evidence was in Emily's hollow cheeks, in the silence of the house, in the absence of his presence where it should have been strongest. Linda's eyes drifted to the closed hallway door. Can I see the children? She asked softly. Emily nodded slowly. They'll be glad to see you. But be gentle. They're not the same as before. Linda rose to her feet, her legs stiff but determined. She took a step toward the hallway, her heart aching. Behind her, Emily's voice followed, low and fragile. Linda, I tried. I tried to protect them from it all. But how do you explain to a child that their father chose to leave? Linda paused, her hand hovering above the doorknob. She had no answer. She only knew that when she opened that door, she would find 2 little souls waiting for something she didn't know if she could give. Comfort, certainty, hope. And she wasn't sure if she had any of those left in her. She pushed the door open slowly, her heart hammering. The house remained quiet. But somewhere deep inside, Linda knew the silence was about to break. Linda steadied herself and drew a long breath that tasted faintly of old tea and dust. She did not ask the same questions again. There was no point in circling words that already sat between them like heavy furniture. Instead, she reached for something firmer than feelings. Show me what you have, she said, voice low, as if speaking louder might make the room tilt. Not stories. Facts. Emily hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the hallway closet. The door stuck for a second, gave way with a tired sigh, and she pulled out a worn canvas tote bulging with papers. She sat on the table as though lowering a sleeping child and began to sort through envelopes, rubber-banded bundles, and a battered spiral notebook that had bite marks along the edges where worry must have chewed the cardboard down to fuzz. Emily slid the notebook across. I started writing everything because dates were blurring, she said. Payments due, calls made, who said what and when they said it. I needed proof, not for a judge, not yet, but for my own mind. Linda opened the notebook. The first page was neat, almost hopeful, lines ruled with a careful hand, entries written in steady strokes. But the careful handwriting lost its discipline as the pages went on, letters slanting, the ink denting the paper as if pressed by a shaking hand. There were lists of phone numbers. The times calls were placed, the minutes on hold. Dotted between them were single sentences that were not records so much as small detonations. He refused to answer. His voicemail is full. He asked me not to contact him at work. He said he needs peace. Work, Linda repeated quietly, as if the word might still be a fragile bridge. He is still there? Emily pulled a windowed envelope and slid out a thin letter emblazoned with a corporate logo Linda recognized. The phrasing was politely bloodless. Your resignation has been received. Final paycheck processed. Benefits will end at the close of the month. At the bottom, an electronic signature that was unmistakably his. The same swooping T he had practiced as a teenager until it looked like pride. The paper made a soft sound under Linda's fingers that felt louder than a shout. He did not tell me that, Linda said, though she was not sure to whom the objection belonged. Emily opened another folder and produced a series of statements. Bank transactions ran in quiet rows, a ledger of choices. Linda's eyes moved down the columns and caught on entries that seemed to have stepped out of their ordinary life. A long receipt at a furniture store whose name she did not know, a charge at a nursery that sold plants and patio sets, a ring of expenses across cafes in a different part of town, places Thomas had never mentioned. Then a payment labeled Family Pass renewal, a park across the county line. He hates that park, Linda murmured before she could stop herself, remembering how he had once complained about the crowds and the price of lemonade. Emily did not respond. She let the numbers sit there and do their quiet work. Maybe he loaned his car to someone, Linda said, grasping at a harmless possibility and hearing how thin it sounded. Or his wallet was stolen. Emily turned the page. There, in tidy type, was an address Linda did not recognize, a line with a note from a bank. Change of mailing address complete. The date was recent. Beneath it, a scheduled payment to a property management company. First month's rent. The memo line read simply, "New lease." Linda pressed her thumb against the ink as if warmth might blur it and undo whatever it announced. Emily reached for a smaller envelope. Thick with something solid. "This is the part one kept hidden for a while," she said, fingers faltering. She slid out a key ring with a single, unfamiliar key and an attached paper tag stamped with a unit number. He dropped this by the porch one night, inside a takeout bag, so the kids would not see. No note, just a key. I called the number on the tag. The office said the unit is occupied. When I asked by whom, they could not tell me. Privacy, but they confirmed the leaseholder. She did not have to speak the name. The tag itself testified. Linda tightened her grip on the notebook and felt the spiral bite into her palm. She wanted to ask for one more out, one more crack in this wall of fact, a clerical error, a coincidence, a misunderstanding with neat edges. Instead, she found herself searching the room for something familiar enough to hold. A chip mug, a crocheted pillow she remembered from winter holidays. There it was. The pillow rolled tight beneath a chair, as if making itself small could protect it from disappointment. Nothing about that small, brave roll changed a single line on the page before her. "There is more," Emily said, almost apologetically, as if her preparedness were an offense. From another stack, she produced a letter. Not a copy, the original. The paper bowed at the edges where it had been folded and unfolded too many times. She placed it on the table and stepped back. I kept it because I knew I would stop trusting my own memory. Linda did not want to read it. She read it anyway. The lines were short and controlled, free of apology, free of warmth, a stripped language that pretended to be honest when it was only convenient. He had written that he could not live a life that felt like a hallway with no doors, that he needed to breathe, that the children would that Emily would be fine because she was strong, that remaining would be a lie and leaving was, in his words, an act of courage. The last sentence was not a sentence so much as a shrug put into ink. "You'll understand, eventually." Linda's vision blurred. She set the paper down with ceremony, as if it were something that could break, and she had at least that one duty left. Not to shatter what was already past saving. He was not raised to speak like this, she said, and could hear how childish it sounded, how superstitious, as if the way a boy is taught to use words could inoculate a man against cowardice. She thought of the day she had taken Thomas to buy his first pair of school shoes, of his small hand inside hers, warm and impulsive. She thought of how he had been quick to charm and quicker to cut away when bored. Her mind tried to barter with the memory. He used to return. After storms, he came back to his homework, to his chores, to his apologies. But the paper on the table did not bargain. It did not come back. Emily opened her phone and, with visible reluctance, scrolled to a thread, then turned the screen around. "I do not want to do this to you," she said. "I only want to stop feeling like I am telling a story no one believes." There were messages. They began with courtesy and dissolved into distance. The earliest text was a perfect stone. "I will be out of town a few days." Then a list of sterile instructions about pickups and drop-offs, school lunches, the day the bin needed to go to the curb. Each message written as if sent to a service, not a wife. Later came longer stretches of silence. Then a final note that read like a memo to a colleague. "Do not contact me unless it concerns emergencies with the children." After that, a gray system notice at the bottom of the screen. Notification silenced. Linda recognized nothing of it more than words. The deliberate absence, the way silence can be made into a tool. Emily, Linda said, because there had to be something to say, and the name itself was a kind of reaching. Has anyone else seen all this? Emily nodded. Once. An accountant at the nonprofit reviewed the statements, because I needed to understand what I could manage on my income. The school counselor knows I filed paperwork to update contacts. A neighbor helped me photograph the envelopes when my hands would not stop shaking. She slid over a small stack of printed photos. Images of the letter, the bank screens, the returned mail with its indifferent stamp declaring undeliverable. One envelope bore a bold black line across the address where someone at the company had written moved. No forwarding. The heat that flared then surprised Linda. It was not the hot shame of disbelief. It was anger bright enough to throw new light across the same room. Her chair scraped back. She stood and paced once, twice, measuring the small kitchen in steps that were too large for it. He owed you more than a monologue disguised as bravery, she said. He owed those children more than a farewell outsourced to silence. The words startled her with their steadiness. When she looked at Emily, the younger woman was not crying. Instead, there was a kind of bleak relief around her eyes, as if someone had finally named the shape of the smoke filling the house. Linda sat again. Her mind worked around a different axis now, past her own stunned heart and into the hard, practical terrain that mothers and grandmothers know by muscle memory. Tell me what is unpaid, she said. Do not spare me. Tell me where the holes are. Emily reached for another file, but Linda lifted a hand. Not yet, she added gently. I do not want numbers to be the first thing I hold for them. She let that settle. But I will hold them. The refrigerator hummed, a small mechanical heartbeat. Somewhere a floorboard cooled and clicked. The house did not feel empty to Linda anymore. It felt paused, as though breath were returning to a body that had been holding itself very still. She looked down at the letter again, and then at the key, that little piece of metal that unlocked a door she did not know. If I write him, Linda asked, will he read it? Emily's face told her the answer before the words came. I tried sending messages that did not accuse, only asked. I tried postcards the children drew. The last time I tried, the number bounced the call right away. He knows your voice, Linda. He might answer yours. Or he might let it ring and let the ringing become the answer. Linda pressed her palms together, the old church gesture returning to her hands, even though she was not praying. She remembered the cadence of her own mother's warnings about love that takes without giving back. She remembered ignoring those warnings and being lucky anyway. Not everyone was spared. She let the memory pass before it could turn into lecture. I will not beg him, Linda said, surprising herself with the firmness of it. Not for me, not even for him. But I will not let a lie stand in the doorway of my house. Emily drew a slow breath and exhaled, as if loosening a band she had worn too long. There is one more thing, she said, and the way she said it told Linda that all of this had been the preface to something harsher. She removed a folded printout, the paper still warm from a recent reprint. At first glance it was banal, a confirmation email from a local clinic, but the details organized themselves with an awful clarity. Patient name, a woman Linda had never met. Responsible party, Thomas. Purpose, routine check for a child. The date matched a weekend Linda remembered spending alone, waiting for a call that did not come. There was no kindness in the document, only facts, and yet those facts were precise enough to feel like cruelty. Linda did not flinch. She let the line of information work through her, and where denial might once have lived, something resolute settled instead, heavy and still. She picked up the printout and held it at an angle that caught the light, as if light might find a benevolent gloss hidden in bureaucratic ink. It did not. She set it down with care. When she finally lifted her gaze, she met Emily's eyes and, for the first time since she had walked in, there was no distance between what she knew and what she allowed herself to know. You asked for proof, Emily said in a voice that had lost its quiver. This is all I have. It was enough to break me. It has to be enough to build something, too. Linda nodded, a single decisive tilt. Something in her face must have changed, because the wary line around Emily's mouth loosened, not into a smile, That would be too much to ask of an afternoon like this. But into a curve that allowed breath to pass without scraping. All right, Linda said. Then we begin from truth. She looked at the letter, the statements, the key, the clinic printout. Each item belonged to the same story. She could not hate paper. She could not forgive it either. She gathered the stack into a single, square pile and tapped the edges flush with a quiet professionalism that felt close to a vow. You will not carry this alone. Emily's fingers brushed the table, then stilled. Thank you, she whispered, the words almost soundless, and yet they filled the room better than any apology Thomas might ever have tried to write. Linda did not answer. She was listening to the strange new steadiness inside herself, to the way shock can harden into intention without fanfare. The day had pivoted. She could feel like a shift in weather pressure, a barely perceptible drop that makes birds fall silent for a moment before they change course. There was movement in the hallway, the faint suggestion of small feet deciding whether to approach. Linda kept her eyes on the papers a moment longer, letting the reality complete its settling. She did not need explanations anymore. Not from Thomas. Not even from herself. Proof had done its work. When she lifted her head, the thin pain of doubt that had separated her from the present was gone, cleanly removed, and the present looked back at her without flinching. The sound from the hallway grew clearer, the faint creak of the floorboards followed by the shuffle of hesitant feet. Linda and Emily exchanged a glance, and without words, both knew it was Liam. The boy appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled, his small body wrapped in a blanket that trailed along the floor. His eyes, usually so lively, carried the heavy stillness of a child who had learned too soon how silence works. He looked at his grandmother, then at the table covered in papers and objects that did not belong to his world. "Grandma?" he asked in a whisper, as though afraid of being scolded for speaking too loudly. Linda opened her arms immediately, and Liam climbed onto her lap with the urgency of a child afraid she might disappear if he waited. His body was warm, trembling slightly, and Linda pressed her cheek to his hair, feeling the fragile weight of his trust. Sophie peeked out a moment later, rubbing her eyes with her tiny fists. Emily lifted her, setting her gently beside her brother. The children's presence changed the air instantly. The papers on the table seemed shameful in their exposure, adult evidence in a world that should have been only crayons and blocks. Linda smoothed Liam's hair back. "I brought something for you," she said, her voice steady. She reached into her bag and pulled out the puzzle box wrapped in bright paper. Liam's eyes widened with a brief flicker of excitement. Sophie clapped softly when Linda handed her the storybook, hugging it against her chest. For a moment, Linda let herself breathe. The weight of what Emily had shown her remained, but the children reminded her of what mattered more than betrayal itself, what had been left behind. Emily moved quietly to the kitchen, giving Linda space with them. She returned a few minutes later with 2 mugs of tea for the adults and small cups of juice for the children. Linda watched Sophie drink in tiny sips, her gaze distant, as if each gulp was effort rather than relief. When Emily set her cup down, she reached once more for the tote bag she had shown Linda earlier. This time she pulled out something that made Linda's chest tighten in a new way, a photograph. It was recent, printed on glossy paper, the kind of candid picture families often take during outings. The image showed Thomas in a park, sitting on the grass with a woman Linda had never seen before. She had dark hair tied back, her head tilted toward him with familiarity. Between them was a boy of about 8 years old, smiling with ease, his hand resting on Thomas's knee as though he had always belonged there. Emily did not explain. She simply placed a photo on the table where Linda could see it. Linda's fingers froze. Her eyes roamed across the details of the photo, the stroller behind the woman. A cooler opened beside them, the unmistakable comfort of a man not visiting but belonging. The sunlight caught Thomas's face in a way that made him look almost younger, freer, as if the responsibilities he had once carried here had never existed. "He sent this to me by mistake," Emily said finally, her tone stripped of all drama. "It arrived as a message attached to a group text I wasn't supposed to be part of. He must not have realized my number was still in the thread." A picture of his new family outing. A slip? Linda's breath caught in her throat. "A new family," she whispered, the words sounding impossible even as she said them. Emily leaned back in her chair. That boy in the picture, she told people he's hers. Thomas introduces him as his stepson. It's all so normal for them, as if the four of us here never existed. The photograph glistened under the dim kitchen light. Too sharp, too alive. Linda wanted to tear it in half, to protect her grandchildren from its cruel suggestion, but Liam's small hand reached across the table before she could move. He picked up the photo, studying it with innocent focus. "Is that Daddy?" he asked. His voice carried neither anger nor joy, only confusion. Linda froze. Emily's shoulders tensed. Sophie leaned closer to see, her eyes widening at the sight of her father's familiar smile. "Yes," Emily said gently, her voice steady despite the strain. "That's Daddy." "But who's that boy?" Liam pressed, his brows furrowing. Emily looked at Linda for help, but Linda's throat had locked tight. The silence stretched until Emily answered carefully. "That's a friend of his, someone he spends time with now." Liam studied the image longer. Then, in a movement that felt too old for his young body, he set the photo back down, face down on the table. "I don't like it," he said simply, his small shoulders slumping. Sophie crawled onto Linda's lap and pressed her face against her chest, as if hiding from something she couldn't name. Linda wrapped her arms around Sophie, her eyes locked on the back of the photo. Her thoughts ran wild. Memories of Thomas as a boy with scraped knees, Thomas as a teenager testing boundaries, Thomas as a man holding his firstborn in his arms. Each memory collided against the glossy reality of the picture. The two versions could not coexist, and yet they did, brutally. Emily reached for the photo and slipped it back into the folder. "This is why I stopped asking him to call," she whispered. "Every time I tried, I got less of him. And then I saw this, and I realized I wasn't asking for him anymore. I was asking for a ghost he'd already buried." Linda felt her chest ache with something deeper than betrayal. It was grief, but sharper, because the person they mourned was still alive somewhere, smiling for cameras in parks that had once belonged to his own children. She kissed Sophie's hair and said softly, "You don't need to worry. Grandma's here now." The words were not enough, but they were a beginning. Emily looked at her with a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. The air between them no longer felt like accusation or defense, but recognition. Two women holding different shards of the same broken glass. Liam yawned, his small body heavy against Linda's side. "Can you stay tonight, Grandma?" he asked, his voice muffled. Linda stroked his hair. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll stay." Emily's eyes glistened. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Linda nodded, her jaw set with a quiet promise. The photograph had given her no choice. Whatever Thomas had chosen, whatever life he had stepped into, she would not allow his children to be left staring at shadows of what they'd lost. She tightened her hold on them both, feeling their small breaths against her, and inside her, a decision began to form, one that she would not speak yet, but that had already taken root. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It was waiting. Evening crept through the windows like a soft tide, the kind that hushes a house without asking. Linda felt the change in the air when the shadows thickened along the hallway and the small clock on the mantel ticked with a steadier confidence, as if time itself were gathering the day and folding it away. She rose from the couch and glanced at Emily, who stood by the doorway with her arms crossed, not in defiance but in an instinctive pose that kept her together. Without words, Linda nodded toward the children's rooms. Emily answered with a small tilt of her chin, the permission tucked inside it both grateful and tense. The lights in the hallway were dim. The wall carried faint marks of little hands and the skids of small shoes, signs of ordinary life that felt precious now that ordinary had become a stranger. The first door was half closed. Linda pressed it open with two fingers and found the room dim except for a nightlight casting a shallow pool of gold across the carpet. Liam was not on the bed. The covers were lumped in a hill of fabric, but there was no boy beneath. Linda listened. A breath, barely there, trembled from a shape made by the blanket draped over the far side of the bed, where a small cave had been built between mattress and wall. She crouched, knees whispering as they bent, and lifted the corner of the blanket a few inches. Two eyes stared back at her, wide and waiting. "Hi, sweetheart," Linda said. keeping her voice gentle, as if the room itself had a sore throat. "It is me." The eyes did not blink. Then the little face surfaced, careful and quick, the way a turtle checks the surface of a lake. Liam's chin wobbled. "Did you come take us away?" The question was so practiced, it broke her heart. It had the rhythm of something he had rehearsed in the quiet of his own fear. Each word fitted to the next like a row of blocks. Linda let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She would not lie to him. She would not make promises that floated away in the morning. She reached under the blanket with both hands, slow and sure, and he let her pull him into the soft middle of the room, where the nightlight made their shadows look taller on the wall. "I came to be here," she said. "To stay, to help, to make sure you and Sophie have what you need. If stay means taking you somewhere for safety or for joy, we will do that. If stay means keeping this house kind and warm, we will do that. But tonight, I am here. And tomorrow, I will still be here." He searched her face as if the truth might be hiding near her mouth. "You will not leave in the morning?" "I will not leave in the morning," she answered, and heard how steady she sounded, as though a deep part of her had already signed the statement in ink. His shoulders loosened all at once, and he folded into her lap, all knees and elbows, the way little boys do when they decide they can rest for a while. Linda rocked him with small motion, a boat swaying in safe water. "Did someone tell you I would take you away?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I asked in my head if I could go somewhere that does not hurt to think about." Linda kissed his temple. "We can make that place together," she said. "Sometimes it is a room. Sometimes it is a story. Sometimes it is a kitchen table. Sometimes it is just two people breathing until the hard part passes." Footsteps padded behind her. Sophie, in pajamas printed with tiny moons, stood at the threshold rubbing one eye with the back of her hand and holding the storybook against her stomach with the other. She did not say anything at first. She crossed a small distance and pressed herself against Linda's leg, tapping her forehead to Linda's knee like a little deer nudging for reassurance. "Come here, Sunflower," Linda said, shifting so one arm could circle Sophie and the other could keep Liam tucked close. The children fit together against her as if they had been made to shelter in the same harbor, two small bodies with the same storm to outlast. Sophie lifted the book of fraction, an offering and a request. "We can read," Linda said. "But first, can I ask something?" The children were quiet in the way of animals that understand tone better than words. "Can we make this room feel like a safe fort before we read? A fort keeps worry at the door. Worry can knock, but it does not get to come inside." Liam nodded. Sophie nodded after a heartbeat, always a small echo to her brother's courage. Linda looked around. The materials of childhood were everywhere, just waiting to be given a job. She pulled two chairs closer to the bed and draped a light blanket over them to make a roof. She invited Liam to decide where the entry would be and asked Sophie to pick a guardian from her plush animals. Sophie chose a worn stuffed rabbit with one ear flopped sideways and placed it at the fort entrance with seriousness, the way a guard stands at a gate. Linda fetched a small string of paper stars from the closet shelf and pinned them along the blanket roof with clothespins she found in a basket. Each star a little oath that tomorrow would happen. They crawled inside. The nightlight glowed through the blanket, turning the space into a soft planet. Air smelled like fabric and warm hair and crayons. Linda settled against a bed frame and opened the book Sophie had brought. But instead of reading the printed story, she began to tell a different one Liam could not predict and therefore could not dread. Her voice fell into the cadence that comes from old lullabies and front porch summers. "Once there was a lighthouse," she said, "painted white with a red cap like a Johnny hat. It stood on a cliff where storms liked to practice being dramatic. Waves tried to push the rocks around. Wind tried to steal the roofs from houses. But the lighthouse did one thing with all its might. It kept shining, even when the fog was rude, even when the rain forgot its manners. Its light said, 'Here's home. Here's a way.'" She paused. "Now, sometimes ships forget to look. Sometimes captains think they know better. But the lighthouse keeps shining anyway, because it is not about being thanked. It is about being true." Liam's breathing slowed. Sophie nestled her hand inside Linda's, palm warm and small, and the rabbit kept its post at the guard side of the blanket door. Linda continued, letting the story tilt toward the lesson without naming it so strongly that it became medicine. One night, a little boat got turned around. It did not know which way to point. The sky was loud. The sea was bossy. The little boat called out, "Will someone come and tell me what to do?" And the lighthouse, who could not move from its rock, answered, "I cannot come to you, but I can make sure you can see. Keep your eyes on me, and you will find your harbor." Sophie's thumb drifted toward her mouth, hesitated, then fell back, as if the story had given her something else to hold. Liam whispered, "What if the boat gets tired?" "Then the sea carries it a little," Linda said, "and the lighthouse shines a little brighter." They sat like that for a while, the story turning pages that did not exist. When Linda finally closed the real book, she shifted the blanket door just wide enough to see Emily leaning in the actual doorway, chin lifted off a hand as she watched, not interfering. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that did not need language, a recognition of sacred ground. "Time to sleep," Linda whispered. She helped Liam climb into bed and tucked the blanket snug around his shoulders. She tucked Sophie beside her brother, because Sophie's courage grew best when it could borrow his. Before she turned away, Liam caught her wrist. "Grandma," he said, in that soft voice children use when they want to stop the future for a moment. "If I dream something scary, can I call you?" "You will not have to call," Linda said. "I will hear you." He seemed satisfied. Sophie tugged on the ear of the rabbit and placed it between them like a shared secret. Linda turned off the lamp and let the nightlight keep its small gold promise. She stood for a long breath, listening the way only grandmothers know how to listen, down into the bones of a room. The children's breathing drifted toward sleep like two boats that have learned the current. She stepped into the hallway and pulled the door almost closed, leaving a sliver so her promise could pass through if needed. Emily had moved back to the living room and was gathering the stray papers into a single, obedient stack, as if tidiness could persuade sorrow to behave. Linda joined her and slid the stack into the tote, then set the tote on the floor beside the couch, not to hide it, but to lower it from the pedestal of the table where it had ruled the afternoon. "Do you want some water?" Emily asked, voice low, so the night would not take offense. Linda nodded. In the kitchen, the faucet ran with a small silver sound. She drank, and the coolness seemed to move all the way into her thoughts, clearing a path. She set the glass down and placed both hands on the counter. Her fingers looked older than they did yesterday. That thought did not frighten her. Age, she decided, was what you earned when you refused to abandon ship. "I will need a drawer," she said quietly, surprising herself at the practicality of it. "A place for spare clothes. A toothbrush. If I keep my things in a bag, it will feel like I might leave. I am not leaving." Emily closed her eyes for a heartbeat and opened them again. "The hall dresser," she said. "Second drawer. I will clear it." "I will help," Linda said. "Tomorrow." She let the word sit. Tomorrow was already different because she had made a decision inside it. She would call the neighbor who watered her plants and ask her to fill the pitcher a little more often. She would tell the woman at the library who saved paperbacks for her that she would pick them up later. She would keep the key to her own apartment on the ring in her purse, but she would not keep it ready in her hand. She would sleep here, in the room with the old fan and the window that faced the tree with the stubborn nest, and if the children called in the night, she would hear them. They turned off lamps one by one, letting darkness settle with dignity rather than shock. At the doorway to the hallway, Linda stood still and listened again. No whimpering, no sudden tiny feet, just the hush of a house deciding to believe in rest. She felt the old stir of a prayer rise, not to fix what was broken by morning, not to punish, not to return the past, but to grant steadiness, the kind a lighthouse knows by heart. On her way to the spare room, she paused by the children's door and touched the wood with the tips of her fingers, the way a conductor touches the edge of stage before a performance begins. She did not say anything. The vow did not need words. It was in the muscles of her back as she straightened, in the way her steps made no noise so as not to disturb what had been soothed, in the calm that sat where panic had been only hours ago. She had come to visit. She had arrived at silence that felt like a verdict. Now inside that same silence, she had planted something resilient. She turned down the spare bed and sat on its edge, shoes lined in a neat row beneath the chair, as if order could introduce mercy. Through the open window drifted the faintest sound of a train from far away, the kind of noise that reminds a person of distance and time and the possibility of returning. Linda lay back and stared at the ceiling until the ghosts of the paper stars in the children's fort seemed to hang above her too. Somewhere, Thomas had chosen a different story. Here, in this house, a new story had begun without his consent. It would be built of small mornings and repaired nights, of lunches packed and pages read, of steady hands and calm voices. It would be sturdy not because it did not break, but because it learned how to mend. She reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. The room simplified into darkness. For a breath, she listened again, one more time, the instinct as old as motherhood. The house answered with the soft rhythm of sleeping children and the quiet gratitude of walls that had been asked to hold less and had been given more. Linda closed her eyes. She did not rehearse arguments. She did not build speeches. She held only a single line, simple and shining, the way a beacon holds its arc. Stay. The morning entered quietly, without ceremony, as if it did not want to disturb the fragile calm that had settled in the house overnight. Pale light filtered through the kitchen curtains, painting soft lines across the counters. Linda was already awake. She had slipped out of the spare room before anyone else stirred, her steps practiced in silence. She busied herself with the rhythm of breakfast, the clink of the spoon in a bowl, the low hum of the kettle heating water. The smell of toasted bread soon began to travel down the hallway, a smell she hoped might coax life back into the house. Emily emerged not long after, her hair loose, her eyes heavy but clearer than they had been the night before. She paused at the doorway, watching Linda spread butter on the toast with a precision that made the act feel important. For a moment, neither spoke. There was no need. The soft scrape of knife against bread carried its own message. Life was continuing, even in the ruins. Morning, Emily said finally, her voice hoarse. Linda looked up, offered a small smile. Morning. Tea or coffee? Tea, Emily answered, moving to the table. She sat down and rested her elbows on the wood, rubbing her temples with slow circles. When Linda placed a steaming mug in front of her, Emily wrapped both hands around it as if drawing warmth directly into her bones. The children were still asleep, giving the two women a rare pocket of quiet. Linda poured her own tea and sat opposite her daughter-in-law. For a few minutes, they ate in near silence. The toast crackled softly when bitten. The tea gave off gentle steam, and the ordinary acts grounded them. Then, slowly, Emily began to speak. I thought when he left, she said, eyes fixed on the tea, that the hardest part would be the nights. But it's not. It's mornings. Waking up and realizing the day is mine alone to carry. Bills, work, the children, all of it waiting like weights stacked by the door. She paused, shaking her head slightly. I try to keep moving, because if I stopped, even for a moment, I was afraid I'd never start again. Linda reached across the table and placed her hand lightly over Emily's. You shouldn't have had to do it alone, she said. The words carried no accusation, only sorrow. Emily's throat worked as she swallowed. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. His parents, I mean your family, they thought it was my fault, that I must have driven him away. I lost more than a husband. Linda, I lost the people I thought would stand beside me. Linda's grip on her hand tightened. I can't speak for the others, but I was in the dark too. I believed my son was working, being a father, being a husband. I had no idea She broke off, her voice catching. But I know now, and I won't turn my back on you. Not ever. The words settled between them like a binding. Emily blinked rapidly, then nodded, her lips trembling. For the first time since Linda had arrived, her face softened, as if the walls she had built around herself had cracked just enough to let a little air through. Linda withdrew her hand gently, giving Emily space to breathe. She stood and began slicing fruit for the children, the knife moving steadily across the cutting board. They'll wake soon. We should give them a breakfast that feels like comfort, not survival, she said. Emily gave a small, surprised laugh, a sound brittle with disuse. Comfort, she repeated, as if the word were strange on her tongue. I've forgotten what that feels like. You'll remember, Linda replied. One meal at a time, one morning at a time. The two women moved together in the kitchen then, an unspoken choreography forming. Emily scrambled eggs, while Linda buttered toast and laid out plates. They worked in a rhythm that felt almost like harmony, the quiet clatter of dishes filling the silence with something sturdier than grief. By the time Liam and Sophie wandered sleepily into the kitchen, rubbing their eyes, the table was set with bright fruit, eggs, toast, and juice. Sophie climbed onto a chair beside her grandmother, hugging the storybook she had carried from the night before. Liam slid into a seat, eyes widening at the sight of a full breakfast. Wow, he whispered. It looks happy. Linda's heart clenched at the innocence of the remark, but she smiled warmly. That's the idea, she said. They ate together, the first shared meal since Linda's arrival. The children's chatter began cautiously, as though they were testing whether the house could hold their voices again. But soon, small stories spilled out, about a drawing Liam had made at school, about Sophie's favorite song from class. Emily listened with rapt attention, nodding, laughing softly at the right moments. Linda watched the way her daughter-in-law leaned forward, eyes alight, and thought how starved Emily must have been for these ordinary sounds. When the plates were nearly empty and the children had wandered off to the living room with their toys, Linda and Emily lingered at the table. The kettle whistled again, and Linda poured them each a second cup of tea. Emily spoke first. I didn't think I'd ever say this, but it feels lighter with you here. Not fix, just lighter. Like I can finally breathe without feeling guilty for it. Linda looked at her, steady and calm. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. I can't change what Thomas did, but I can stand with you in what's left. For a moment, Emily's eyes filled, and this time she did not stop the tears. They slid down her cheeks, quiet and unashamed. Linda said nothing, only reached across the table again and let her presence be enough. The bond forming between them was not forced, not built from obligation or convenience. It was being carved out of shared loss, shared determination, and the fragile beginnings of trust. The children's laughter drifted from the other room, the sound thin but real. Emily wiped her face and gave a shaky smile. Maybe we can make this house a place they remember as safe, even if their father isn't here, even if things are broken. Maybe safe is enough. Linda's reply was simple, but it carried the weight of her conviction. Safe is everything. The tea grew cool in their cups, but neither woman minded. For the first time in months, the kitchen carried not just the weight of survival, but the first stirrings of a new foundation. One built not on Thomas's absence, but on the quiet strength of the two women who had chosen to remain. It was fragile, yes, but fragile things, when cared for, could grow into something unbreakable. And Linda knew this was only the beginning. The day unfolded slowly, stretched between the children's laughter and the tasks that filled the corners of ordinary life. Linda washed the dishes while Emily folded laundry, their movements weaving together like threads in a fabric not yet whole, but already holding. The children darted in and out of the rooms, dragging toys across the floor, asking for juice, calling out questions that belonged to the innocent rhythm of their world. It felt almost normal, almost steady, as if the house itself were remembering how to breathe again. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. The sound cut through the air with sharp urgency, a sound that belonged to neither laughter nor routine. Emily froze mid-fold, the small shirt in her hands crumpled between her fingers. She looked at the phone on the counter, as if it were something dangerous. Linda, sensing the shift, dried her hands quickly on a towel and stepped closer. Emily hesitated for a moment longer, then picked it up. Hello? There was a pause on the other end. Then came a voice Linda had not heard in months. A voice that used to be the axis of her world, but now felt like a stranger's wearing her son's tone. Emily, Thomas said, the syllables flat, as though he were calling an acquaintance rather than his wife. I need to talk to the kids. Emily's knuckles whitened around the phone. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing a slow breath before answering. You don't get to call like this. Not after 3 months of silence. His sigh was audible and patient. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I just want to hear their voices. Linda stood still, her chest tightening, but she didn't speak. She stayed near the kitchen doorway, listening. They've been asking for you, Emily said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. They cry at night. They've been through hell. And you call now like it's just a normal afternoon. I've been busy, Thomas replied coldly. You knew things weren't working between us. You knew I needed space. But that doesn't mean I don't love them. Don't punish me by keeping them away. Emily's eyes opened, hard and sharp now. Punish you? You left them. You left us. Don't twist this and make it about what I'm doing to you. On the other end, Thomas remained silent for a moment, then spoke again, his tone clipped. Just let me talk to Liam and Sophie. That's all I'm asking. Emily's hand shook. And what do I tell them? That their father suddenly remembered they exist? That he wants to drop in for a chat between dinners with his new family? The silence that followed was heavier than his words. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice carried a defensive edge. I never asked for you to understand. But the kids, they deserve me, even if you and your mother-in-law can't stand the sight of me anymore. At that, Linda's breath caught. He knew she was there. Or perhaps he only assumed. Either way, the sound of his indifference struck her like a stone. Emily's face hardened, and she gripped the phone tighter. You don't get to walk away and then decide when you're a father again. You don't get to wound them and then call it love. She ended the call before he could respond, her finger pressing down with finality. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the faint sound of the children laughing in the next room, unaware of the battle that had just taken place on the other side of the kitchen wall. Emily set the phone down on the counter with trembling hands. Her breathing was uneven, her face pale. Linda stepped forward, reaching out. Let me speak to him next time, she said softly. Please. I need to look him in the eye, even if it's only through a line. He's my son, but he's not the man I thought I raised. I need to hear it for myself. Emily's eyes filled with tears she fought to contain. She shook her head. He'll fool you, Linda. He always knows how to twist words, how to make people feel sorry for him. He'll sound calm, reasonable, as if all of this is just a misunderstanding. That's what he does. He fooled me for years. Linda exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then maybe it's time he tried that with someone who already knows the truth. I won't let him trick me. Not now. Not after what I've seen. Emily stared at her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. If he calls again, you can answer. But I won't let him come near them, not until he proves he deserves to. The conversation ended there, the weight of it settling between them. Linda helped Emily finish folding the laundry, both of them moving in silence, their hands busy while their minds replayed the voice that had disrupted the fragile calm. That evening, as the children prepared for bed, Linda lingered by the hallway phone. She half expected it to ring again, the sound cutting through the house with its demand. But the line stayed quiet. Liam asked her to help him with his blanket fort, and Sophie pressed the rabbit into her hands before climbing under the covers. Their innocence shielded them from the storm gathering just outside their lives, but Linda knew it would not hold forever. Later, when Emily had retreated to her room and the children slept, Linda sat alone in the living room. The tote of papers rested at her feet, the photograph of Thomas's new life still buried within it. She thought of his voice, so flat, so certain, as if he believed he still held authority here. She thought of Emily's trembling hands, of the children's wide eyes when they had asked about their father. And in that stillness, Linda made a decision. She would not sit by and let Thomas's absence dictate the course of their lives. She would face him herself, not through Emily's pain, not through the children's longing, but directly. She would go to him, not to plead, not to beg, but to remind him of what he had left behind, and to make clear that she would not let him wound his family again without reckoning with the damage he had done. The phone remained silent, but Linda knew it was only a matter of time before it rang again. And when it did, she would be ready. The decision pressed on Linda all night, shaping her dreams into restless fragments. When the morning came, she rose before anyone else, dressed in quiet determination, and wrote a small note for Emily on the kitchen table. I need to see him. I will be back." The words were simple, but her hand shook slightly as she placed the pen down. She brewed herself a quick cup of coffee and drank it standing up, the bitter taste grounding her resolve. Emily found her in the hallway as she laced her shoes. Her hair was still mussed from sleep, her eyes wide with the warning of someone who already knew what Linda intended. "You're going to him, aren't you?" she asked, voice tight. Linda did not try to deny it. "I am. I need to look my son in the eye. I need him to hear what he's done, not just from you, not just from silence, but from me." Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Linda, you don't know what you'll find. He's different. The man you remember isn't the one living in that house. He'll twist things, make excuses, maybe even try to charm you. Don't let him pull you back into believing he cares." "I'm not going to him as a mother who hopes," Linda said firmly. "I'm going as a woman who's seen the truth." Emily studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "At least take the address with you. It's in that folder. I wrote it down when I tried to send the kids drawings. He should know they reached someone, even if not him." Linda tucked the slip of paper into her purse and hugged Emily briefly, then left before doubt could anchor her feet. The bus ride to the other side of town felt longer than it should have, each stop dragging out her anticipation. She watched neighborhoods change through the window, small houses fading into newer developments, streets lined with trimmed hedges and polished cars. It was a part of the city Thomas had never shown interest in before, a place that spoke of curated lives and the kind of order that pretended to erase flaws. When the bus finally stopped near a row of townhouses, Linda stepped down onto the pavement and felt the weight of her purpose settle even heavier. The address led her to a neat brick building with white trimmed windows and hanging flower baskets on the porch. She recognized Thomas immediately. He was outside, leaning casually against the railing, a bag of groceries in one hand. His hair was shorter than she remembered, his shirt pressed, his face relaxed in a way that almost made her stumble. Not because it looked like her son, but because it didn't look like a man torn by regret. When he saw her, surprise flickered across his features, but only for a moment. Then he smiled faintly, as though her presence were an unexpected but manageable complication. "Mom," he said, stepping forward, "what are you doing here?" Linda's throat tightened at the word, but she kept her composure. "I came to see you, to understand." Thomas shifted the bag to his other hand. "Understand what?" "I thought Emily might call you. I figured you'd side with her." "This isn't about sides," Linda said evenly. "It's about your children, about the family you left behind." For the first time, unease flickered in his eyes. He motioned toward the door. "Maybe we should talk inside." Linda hesitated but followed, determined not to let fear silence her. The townhouse was clean, decorated with bright rugs and photographs of smiling faces. On the mantel sat a framed picture of Thomas with the woman from the park and her son, all three leaning close together, as though they had been a family forever. Linda's chest constricted at the sight. Thomas set the groceries down and gestured to the couch. "Sit, Mom. Let's talk like adults." She sat, her back straight, her gaze steady on him. "I don't want excuses. I don't want reasons. I just want to know how you can look at your children's faces in photos you don't bother to see in person, while another boy sits beside you like he's yours." His jaw tightened. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Linda shot back. "You walked away. You left Emily with bills she can barely pay. You left Liam asking every night if his father still loves him. You left Sophie clinging to a stuffed rabbit because she doesn't know how else to feel safe. And you did it without a word to me, without a word to anyone. That is simple. That is abandonment." Thomas's expression hardened. "I wasn't happy, Mom. Don't you understand that? I spent years trying to be the man everyone expected me to be, and it was like drowning. With her," he gestured vaguely toward a photograph of the new woman, "I can breathe again. I feel alive." Linda leaned forward, her voice cutting. "And what about the children? Did you ever stop to wonder what they feel while you're out here breathing free? Did you think happiness for yourself excuses the wreckage you left behind?" For a moment, Thomas looked away, his shoulders tense. "They'll adjust," he muttered. "They won't," Linda said firmly. "Children don't adjust to being abandoned. They learn to carry the wound. They learn to doubt love, and I will not let them carry that wound without someone standing between them and the hole you've left. Thomas looked back at her, frustration clear. So what, you're going to raise them? You and Emily against me? Linda met his gaze, unflinching. I am going to protect them. If that means raising them with Emily, yes. If that means standing against you when you try to reappear like nothing happened, yes. I will not let them be pawns in your search for happiness. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Thomas finally dropped onto a chair opposite her, rubbing his temples. You always expected too much from me, he said quietly. Linda's voice softened, but only slightly. I expected you to be a father. That is not too much. He didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than words, an admission wrapped in cowardice. Linda stood, her body trembling with both sorrow and strength. She glanced once more at the photograph on the mantel. The boy's smile was bright, but it wasn't her grandson's. Her grandchildren's faces were waiting for her across town, faces marked not by easy smiles but by longing. She turned back to Thomas. You've made your choice, she said, but so have I, and my choice is them. Without waiting for a reply, she walked to the door, opened it, and stepped back into the sunlight. The air felt heavy, but it was cleaner than the silence inside. She did not look back. As she walked to the bus stop, she pressed her hand against her chest. Her heart hurt, but beneath the pain was a steady beat of resolve. She had faced him. She had seen the truth in his eyes. Not regret, but a hollow selfishness. It was all she needed to know. And when she returned to Emily and the children, she would not return with doubt. She would return with purpose. The ride back felt longer than the one that had carried her there. Linda sat by the bus window, her reflection superimposed over the shifting scenery. Rows of tidy houses blurring into older streets. Children on bicycles flashing past like echoes of the life she wished her grandchildren could have without shadows. She replayed every moment of the encounter with Thomas, his face too calm, his words too rehearsed, his silence too loud. She had expected anger or guilt or even tears. What she had received instead was emptiness disguised as freedom. By the time the bus rumbled to her stop, Linda's resolve had hardened into something sharper. She walked quickly down the familiar streets, her steps purposeful. When Emily opened the door, one glance at Linda's face was enough. She did not ask what had been said. She simply stepped aside to let her mother-in-law in. The children were playing in the living room, blocks stacked in a precarious tower. Sophie looked up first, squealed "Grandma," and ran to her with open arms. Linda bent to lift her, the weight of the little girl grounding her back in what mattered. Liam joined them with a shy smile, wrapping his arms around Linda's waist. I told you she'd come back, Sophie said, proud of her own certainty. Yes, you did, Linda replied, kissing her hair, and here I am. She sat with them for a while, listening to their chatter about school and games, letting their voices wash away the residue of her confrontation. But when the children returned to their blocks, Linda rose and wandered toward the small desk in the corner of the living room. On top of it lay a stack of school papers, a cup of pencils, and beneath it, slightly out of place, a folded sheet of paper with faint creases. Curious, she pulled it free. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, the lines pressed too hard into page. At the top, in blue marker, were the words, Dear Daddy. Her heart clenched. She glanced toward Emily, who was folding laundry on the couch. Emily noticed the paper in her hands and froze, her face tightening. Liam wrote that, she said softly. He didn't mean for anyone to find it. I think he hides them. Linda unfolded the page carefully, as though it might shatter. The words, written in a child's uneven scrawl, were simple but devastating. Dear Daddy, I miss you. Why don't you love us anymore? I am mad at you for making Mommy cry. Sophie cries too. I wanted you to see my drawing of the rocket ship. I don't know if you would like it now. Maybe you like the other boy better. But I am still your son. Love, Liam. Linda's throat tightened until it hurt. She pressed the paper to her chest, her eyes stinging. Emily looked away, blinking rapidly, as if the words had become too sharp to face again. How many of these are there? Linda asked after a long silence. Emily sighed. 3 that I found. maybe more hidden away in drawers or under his bed. He writes them after school, usually when he thinks I'm busy. I tried to ask him about it once, but he just shook his head and changed the subject. It's his way of speaking when he thinks no one is listening. Linda smoothed the paper out on the desk, her fingers trembling. No child should ever have to write words like this, she said, her voice breaking. Emily's eyes glistened. I know, but what can I do? I can't make Thomas answer. I can't make him care. Linda turned toward her, resolve firming in her expression. No, but we can make sure Liam and Sophie know they are not abandoned, that they are loved fiercely and without condition. And if Thomas refuses to be their father, then we will make sure they never doubt they still have family. Emily studied her, and for the first time in weeks, perhaps months, something like relief flickered across her face. You mean that? More than anything, Linda said. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Linda returned to the letter. She read it again under the soft glow of the lamp, each word echoing louder than before. She knew this paper was not just a message to a father who would never read it. It was a cry for someone, anyone, to bear witness. The next morning, Linda made a phone call. She dialed the number of an old friend, Margaret, who had been a lawyer for years and now ran a small practice downtown. They had not spoken in months, but Margaret's voice carried the same steady tone it always had. Linda, what a surprise. How are you? Linda hesitated only a moment. I'm managing, but I need your help. It's about my grandchildren, about what they've been left with. She explained carefully but firmly the situation, Thomas's abandonment, Emily's struggle, the hidden letters, the children's pain. Margaret listened without interrupting, and when Linda finished, her friend's voice was calm but resolute. You have grounds, Linda, more than grounds. If Emily agrees, we can pursue a custody arrangement that gives you both legal authority. That way, Thomas can't just waltz back in whenever he pleases and disrupt their lives again. The word struck Linda like a bell. Custody. Legal authority. It was more than she had imagined, more than she had dared to hope. But as soon as she heard it, she knew it was a path forward. Would you talk to Emily with me? Linda asked. Of course, Margaret said. Set a time and I'll be there. That afternoon, Linda sat with Emily at the kitchen table once more, the letter lie between them like proof too heavy to ignore. She told her about Margaret's offer, about the possibility of securing their home and shielding the children from Thomas's sudden intrusions. Emily was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the paper. Finally, she whispered, Do you really think we could do it? That the court would give us that kind of power? Yes, Linda said firmly, because it's not about us. It's about them, about making sure Liam and Sophie grow up safe, without being yanked back and forth by a man who chose himself over them. Emily's lips trembled, but she nodded. Then let's do it, for them. Linda placed her hand over Emily's, sealing the decision. The children's laughter drifted from the other room, fragile but real, and Linda felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. It was not just survival anymore. It was the beginning of a fight, not against Thomas, but for the future of two small lives who deserved better than the silence and absence he had left behind. And Linda knew she was ready. The appointment with Margaret was set for the following Tuesday. The weekend in between stretched like a long corridor filled with anxious silence and unspoken questions. Linda noticed how Emily kept tidying the same corners of the house over and over, as if neatness could protect her from uncertainty. The children were more restless than usual, sensing currents they could not name. Liam drew picture after picture of houses, each one with smoke rising from the chimney, as though he was trying to pin down the image of home before it slipped away again. Sophie followed Linda constantly, clinging to her skirt, as if afraid that if she let go, someone else might vanish. When Tuesday arrived, Linda dressed carefully, choosing a navy blouse and her plain pearl earrings. She wanted to appear steady, not sentimental. Emily wore a simple gray sweater, her hair tied back, her face pale but composed. They dropped the children at school first, and Linda caught the look in Liam's eyes when he asked, "Will you be here when I get back?" She bent to meet his gaze. "Yes, sweetheart, I'll be here." He nodded solemnly, as if needing to believe it more than anything else. The law office was small but welcoming, with walls lined by shelves heavy with books and a vase of fresh flowers on a reception desk. Margaret met them in the lobby, her presence carrying the calm of someone who had navigated storms for many families before. She ushered them into her office, offered tea, and then sat across the desk with her hands folded. "Linda, fill me in," Margaret began, her tone warm but professional. "But I'd like to hear from you directly. Emily, tell me what you want for Liam and Sophie." Emily's fingers twisted in her lap, but her voice was clear. "I want them safe. I want them to know stability. I don't want Thomas walking in and out of their lives whenever he feels like it. I can't stop him from existing, but I can stop him from hurting them again." Margaret nodded. "That's the heart of it. Now, what we can do is petition the court for joint custody between you and Linda. That means both of you will have legal authority over the children's well-being. Thomas, at this stage, would be excluded from decision-making, though the court may allow supervised visits if he requests them. The judge will consider the evidence of his abandonment, his lack of contact, and the emotional toll on the children." Emily swallowed hard. Will it work? He's still their father. Won't the court side with him? "Courts are guided by the best interests of the children," Margaret explained. "A parent who abandons his family for months, who provides neither financial nor emotional support, weakens his own standing. The fact that you have the grandmother willing to step in strengthens your case, because it shows the children are surrounded by family support rather than instability." Linda leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "Documentation," Margaret replied promptly. "The letter he left, the proof of his resignation, the financial statements, the photographs, and something more powerful than all of that, the children's own voices, not in court directly, since that can be traumatic, but through the testimony of a counselor or teacher who's seen the effects of his absence." Emily's eyes lowered. "Their teacher knows. She asked me once if everything was all right at home, because Liam had stopped participating in class. He used to be so talkative, but now he's quiet, withdrawn." "That could be vital," Margaret said gently, "if she's willing to provide a statement. It will help the judge understand the real impact. The law respects paper, but it listens to hearts too." Linda reached across the desk, touching Emily's hand. "We'll gather everything. We'll make sure the court sees what he's done." Margaret smiled faintly, though her expression carried the weight of reality. "This won't be easy. Thomas may fight back. He may claim he left because of problems in the marriage, that he still deserves equal rights. But the strength of your case is in showing that he abandoned his role as a father, not just as a husband." Emily nodded slowly, determination flickering beneath her fear. "Then we'll fight. I'm tired of feeling powerless." They left the office with a stack of instructions, gathered documents, speak to the teacher, prepare written statements. On the bus ride home, Emily sat in silence, staring out the window. Linda let her be. She knew silence could be a cocoon where decisions matured. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Linda found Emily sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out like a battlefield. She was writing in a notebook, her pen moving quickly, almost furiously. "What are you working on?" Linda asked gently. "My statement," Emily said without looking up. "Margaret said the judge will want to hear from me directly. I want it all down, not just facts, but what it feels like when your child asks why his father doesn't love him anymore. I want the court to see that this isn't about bitterness. It's about survival." Linda sat beside her, pulling her own notepad closer. "Then I'll write mine too, about the boy I raised and the man I saw yesterday, about the difference between the two." For hours, they wrote in silence, their pens scratching across paper, their words turning pain into testimony. When they finally stopped, the clock read nearly midnight. Emily leaned back in her chair, exhaustion in her eyes, but there was also relief. "I thought I'd never be able to put it into words, but now it feels like I've taken something back." Linda reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's what we're doing, taking back what belongs to them. Their right to grow up safe, loved, and protected." The next days were filled with preparation. Linda visited the school and spoke with Liam's teacher, who agreed to provide a statement about his recent withdrawal. Emily gathered the financial documents, while Linda organized the evidence into neat folders. Together, they built a case not just of papers, but of voices. The quiet voices of children too young to stand before a judge, carried instead by those who loved them. Through it all, the children remained unaware of the storm brewing. They played. They laughed more freely now with Linda's constant presence, and they began to ask fewer questions about their father. Linda noticed that each evening, when she tucked them into bed, their breathing steadied more quickly, as if sleep no longer felt like a dangerous place. But beneath the fragile peace, Linda knew a test was coming. The papers they were gathering were shields, but Thomas's shadow was still out there, restless. And sooner or later, he would step back into their lives, not with love, but with demands. She would be ready. The weeks that followed moved with a rhythm both fragile and determined. Linda and Emily kept gathering documents, refining statements, and leaning on Margaret's guidance. Their bond strengthened not because they sought it, but because necessity demanded it. They worked like two hands of the same body, one steadying the other. And while their preparations gave them direction, life for Liam and Sophie began to soften. Their laughter became less hesitant, their drawings brighter, their evenings calmer. It was progress, though Linda knew it was also delicate, a bridge not yet solid. On a Wednesday morning that smelled of early autumn, Linda accompanied Emily to drop the children at school. Liam carried a folder of math worksheets. Sophie clutched her rabbit in one arm and her lunchbox in the other. The schoolyard buzzed with energy. Children running, parents chatting, the scrape of sneakers against pavement. Linda loved seeing the children blend into that noise, part of something ordinary, something safe. But the safety fractured when a familiar voice called out across the lot. "Liam, Sophie." The sound froze Linda where she stood. Emily's head snapped toward the entrance of the yard. There, leaning against the fence with a forced ease, stood Thomas. His hair was neatly combed, his jacket zipped, his smile thin and strained. The children turned at the sound of their names. Sophie's face lit up instinctively, but Liam stiffened, his shoulders tight. Emily stepped forward immediately, placing herself between them and the fence. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "I came to see my kids," Thomas replied, his tone defensive but quiet enough not to draw too much attention. "I have a right to." "You don't," Emily shot back. "Not like this. Not without permission. Not without warning." Teachers at the entrance noticed the tension. One of them, Mrs. Atkins, approached, her expression wary. "Is everything all right?" Linda stepped forward, her hand on Sophie's shoulder. "It will be," she said firmly, though her heart was pounding. "This man is their father, but he doesn't have custody. Please keep the children inside until this is resolved." Thomas's smile faltered. "You don't get to shut me out like that. I'm their father. They deserve to see me." "They deserve consistency," Linda replied, her voice like stone. "You don't get to vanish for months and then appear at the schoolyard as if nothing happened." By now, other parents were noticing, their conversations faltering as they glanced toward the confrontation. Liam stood half hidden behind Emily, his fists clenched. Sophie looked from her grandmother to her father, confusion clouding her small face. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was barely audible, but Thomas heard it. His expression softened instantly, and he took a step toward her. "Hey, princess," he said gently. "I missed you." Emily caught Sophie's hand before she could move. "No," she said firmly, kneeling so her daughter's eyes met hers. "Not like this. When Daddy left, he chose not to be here. You don't have to go to him just because he shows up." Sophie looked torn, her lip trembling. Liam's voice broke the silence. "Why are you here now?" he demanded, his tone sharp for someone so young. "You didn't care before." Thomas flinched. For a second, he looked almost ashamed, then his mask of calm returned. "I was busy, but I care now. That's why I'm here." Linda felt the words cut through the air, hollow and cruel. She stepped forward, her body blocking the children completely. "This is not the place, Thomas. If you want to talk, you go through the court. You do it properly. You don't ambush them." The principal arrived then, summoned by the murmurs spreading across the yard. He was a tall man with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said firmly. "This is not the way to reconnect with your children. You're disrupting the school." Thomas bristled. "I have rights." "You have responsibilities, too," the principal interrupted, his tone unyielding. "And until those are recognized legally, your presence here is not permitted." A security guard had now joined, and the message was clear. Thomas was outnumbered. He looked at Linda, his eyes flashing with anger. "You think you can erase me? You can't. I'll take this to court. You'll see." "Good," Linda replied, her voice calm and final. "We'll see you there." Thomas hesitated, then turned sharply and strode away, his steps echoing across the pavement. The tension in the yard eased slowly, like air leaking from a balloon. Parents resumed their conversations. Though many eyes lingered with curiosity and sympathy, Emily knelt beside the children, holding both their hands tightly. "You're safe," she whispered. "We won't let him hurt you." Liam looked at her, his face pale but resolute. "I don't want him to come here again." "He won't," Linda promised, though she knew promises had to be built into law. She guided the children inside, watching as they disappeared into the rhythm of their classrooms, their small backpacks bouncing with each step. On the walk home, Emily's voice shook with anger. "He thinks he can just show up, make a scene, and walk away like it's nothing. He doesn't care what it does to them." Linda's jaw was tight. "No, but now he's shown his hand. If he wants court, then that's where we'll meet him, and we'll be ready." That afternoon, she called Margaret, explaining everything. Margaret's tone was calm but serious. "This works in your favor," she said. "Witnesses saw his attempt. The school staff can testify. It proves he's unstable, unpredictable, and willing to disrupt their safe environment. Judges don't look kindly on that." For the first time in days, Linda felt a measure of strength return. Thomas's outburst had been reckless, but it had given him something undeniable. Evidence not of abandonment alone, but of intrusion. When the children returned from school, Linda baked a pie with Sophie at her side, while Liam worked on another drawing. This one showed a house again, but this time there were 3 figures holding hands in front of it: himself, Sophie, and their mother. A 4th stood nearby, a smaller figure with gray hair. "That's you, Grandma," Liam explained quietly. Linda's throat tightened, but she smiled. "It's a beautiful picture." It was more than a picture. It was proof of belonging, a map of the home they were rebuilding together. And Linda silently vowed that when they stood before the judge, she would make sure that home remained whole, no matter what Thomas tried to claim. The courtroom was nothing like Linda had imagined. She had expected oak-paneled walls and a sense of grandeur, but what met her instead was a plain, functional space with rows of wooden benches and a raised platform where the judge would preside. The air smelled faintly of paper and polish, the atmosphere both ordinary and heavy with consequence. Emily sat beside her at the long table, her hands clasped so tightly Linda worried she might leave marks on her own skin. Across the aisle, Thomas leaned back in his chair, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. His expression was calm, detached, almost smug, as though this were just another meeting he needed to endure before moving on with his life. Margaret was there, shuffling through files with the precision of someone who had lived in these rooms for decades. She gave Linda and Emily a brief nod of reassurance before rising to her feet as the judge entered. Everyone stood, the scrape of chairs echoing, then sat again when instructed. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm presence, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the case file. "We are here today to consider custody arrangements concerning the minors Liam and Sophie." Her voice carried no judgment, no sympathy, only the weight of responsibility. "I will hear from both parties before making a determination." Thomas's lawyer was the first to speak, painting a picture of a man who had simply been overwhelmed by marital difficulties and needed time to find clarity. He insisted Thomas loved his children deeply and deserved shared custody. He downplayed the months of absence, reframing them as a temporary separation. Linda's jaw clenched at the audacity. She forced herself to stay silent, remembering Margaret's warning. Let the evidence speak. Do not let anger undo the case. Then it was Margaret's turn. She stood gracefully, her voice steady, measured. Your Honor, we are not here because of marital disagreements. We are here because these children were left without their father's presence for more than 3 months, with no communication, no support, and no explanation. We are here because when he chose to return, he did so in ways that caused distress, showing up at their school without authorization, disrupting their safe environment. She gestured to the folders. We have documentation of his resignation from work, of his change of residence, of financial abandonment. We have letters written by the child Liam, hidden away in drawers, asking why his father no longer loves him. And we have testimony from his teacher, confirming the change in his behavior after the father's departure. The judge listened intently, her face unreadable. She turned slightly. Do you have these documents with you? Yes, Your Honor, Margaret replied, handing them over. The judge leafed through the pages, pausing at the letter in Liam's handwriting. Her eyes softened almost imperceptibly before she set it aside. Then came the most difficult part, the children's testimony. They were not brought into the courtroom. Margaret had arranged for a private session recorded on video, where Liam spoke to a counselor. The judge pressed a button, and the screen flickered to life. Liam appeared, small in his chair, his hands twisting in his lap. His voice was quiet but clear. I miss Daddy, but I'm mad too, because he made Mommy cry a lot, and Sophie, and me. I don't understand why he likes another boy more than us. Grandma says we're still loved, but it feels like he forgot. The room was silent. Even Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening, though he tried to mask it. Linda pressed her hands together to keep from crying, but tears gathered in her eyes anyway. Emily covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. The judge turned off the video and looked at Thomas. Do you wish to respond to what your son has said? Thomas hesitated, then shrugged slightly. He's a child. He doesn't understand the complexity of adult relationships. The judge's gaze sharpened. What he understands is abandonment. That is not complex. For the first time, Thomas faltered. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but the judge raised her hand. Enough! Margaret stood again. Your Honor, Emily has carried the weight of parenting alone. Linda, despite the betrayal of her own son, has stepped forward to provide stability. Together, they have created a home where the children feel safe again. That is the environment we are asking you to protect. The judge nodded slowly, taking notes. After a long pause, she spoke. I have considered the testimony, the evidence, and the conduct of all parties. This court finds that it is in the best interest of the minors that primary custody remain with their mother, Emily, with joint legal authority granted to the grandmother, Linda. The father, Thomas, will be permitted supervised visitation only, contingent on proof of stability and consistent involvement. This is not a punishment. It is a protection. The welfare of the children must come first. The gavel struck once, the sound echoing like a final word. Emily let out a sob, quiet but filled with relief. Linda reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. Across the room, Thomas looked stunned, his lawyer already whispering about appeals. But his expression revealed something deeper, the realization that he had lost more than custody. He had lost the trust of those who once loved him most. As they left the courtroom, sunlight streamed to the tall windows, casting long beams across the floor. Linda felt the weight of the decision settle into her bones, not as victory, but as a solemn responsibility. They had won the right to protect Liam and Sophie. Now came the harder part, living it day by day, ensuring the children's wounds would heal into scars strong enough to carry them forward. Outside, the air felt fresher. Emily leaned against the wall, tears streaking her cheeks. It's over, she whispered. Linda shook her head gently. No, my dear, it's just beginning. But this time, we're not walking it alone. The house felt different when they returned from the courthouse. It wasn't the rooms themselves that changed. The walls still bore the faint smudges of children's hands. The kitchen clock still ticked with familiar uneven rhythm, and the curtains still carried a faint smell of detergent and sunlight. What had shifted was the air, the way it settled around them, less heavy, less uncertain. The decision the judge had not erased the past, but had drawn a firm line under it. For the first time in months, Linda felt as though the ground beneath their feet was solid enough to build on. That evening, Linda suggested they prepare a special dinner. Not a celebration in the loud sense, with balloons and fanfare, but a meal that marked a new beginning quietly, with warmth and presence. Emily agreed, though her eyes still showed the exhaustion of the long day. Together they moved through the kitchen, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, arranging plates. The children joined in, eager to help. Liam set the table with care, aligning each fork and knife precisely, while Sophie carried napkins folded into uneven triangles, placing one at each seat with solemn concentration. The aroma of roasting chicken and fresh bread soon filled the house, weaving itself into the atmosphere like a promise. Linda stirred a pot of green beans, while Emily mashed potatoes, their movements synchronized without effort. It felt like music played without instruments, each motion contributing to a harmony greater than its parts. When the food was ready, they all sat at the table together. The children's faces glowed in the soft light of the lamp above them, their eyes wide with anticipation. Emily looked at them for a long moment before speaking. "Today was an important day," she said gently. "The judge made sure that this house will stay safe for you. That no one can take that away. We'll be together, always." Liam tilted his head. "Even if Daddy comes back?" Emily's throat tightened, but before she could answer, Linda leaned forward, her voice calm and steady. "Even if he comes back, he won't be allowed to take you away or hurt you again. The judge made sure of that. What matters now is that you're safe and that you know how much you're loved." Sophie, who had been tracing circles on the table with her finger, looked up suddenly. Her voice was small but clear. "Mommy, I'm happy." The room stilled. Emily blinked, as though the words themselves were too fragile to touch. Slowly, tears welled in her eyes. She reached across the table, cupping her daughter's cheek. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so glad." Liam smiled, perhaps not fully understanding the weight of the moment, but sensing its importance. He leaned against his grandmother, resting his head on her arm. "I'm happy too," he said simply. The air seemed to brighten, as though the house itself had been waiting for these words. Linda's chest ached, but not from sorrow this time. It was an ache of fullness, of seeing hope return to faces that had been clouded for too long. They began to eat, and the table came alive with chatter. Sophie told a long, winding story about her rabbit plush and the adventure it had in her dreams. Liam shared details about a science project at school, his voice animated again, his hands gesturing as though he were presenting to a classroom. Emily laughed, a laugh that had been absent for months, soft but real. Linda joined in, savoring every sound. After dinner, they lingered at the table, plates pushed aside, cups refilled with water and juice. Linda suggested they play a game, something simple. She asked each person to share one thing they were grateful for. Sophie went first, declaring she was grateful for her rabbit and for Mommy's hugs. Liam followed, saying he was grateful for Grandma making forts and for his sister, even though she sometimes stole his crayons. When it was Emily's turn, her voice wavered. "I'm grateful for my children," she said, "for their strength, for their laughter, for the way they remind me that love is bigger than pain." She turned her gaze to Linda. "And I'm grateful for you, for choosing us when you could have walked away too. You've given us back something I thought we'd lost." Linda swallowed hard, her throat tight. She reached for Emily's hand across the table, squeezing it gently. "And I'm grateful for the chance to love you all. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays. And I intend to stay." The room fell into a warm silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Outside, the night stretched calm and clear, stars beginning to scatter across the sky. The weight of the months before was still present, but it no longer defined them. What defined them now was a choice to remain, to protect, to rebuild. Later, after the dishes were washed and the children tucked into bed, Linda stood at the doorway of their room, watching their steady breathing. Sophie clutched her rabbit close, her face peaceful. Liam lay sprawled across the bed, one hand curled around a crayon he had carried under the covers. Linda smiled softly, closing the door with care. In the living room, Emily sat with a blanket around her shoulders. Linda joined her, and for a long time, they simply sat together, listening to the quiet of the house. Finally, Emily spoke. "Do you think they'll remember this part of their childhood? The hard part?" Linda thought for a moment before answering. "They'll remember pieces, but what they'll carry is how it ended, how it was mended. Children don't always remember the storms as much as they remember who held the umbrella." Emily nodded, tears glistening again. "Then we'll keep holding it." Linda reached over, resting her hand gently on Emily's arm. "We will, together." The clock ticked on, steady and unhurried. The night stretched ahead, but it no longer felt daunting. It felt like a road they could walk, step by step, side by side. And as Linda finally rose to go to bed, she carried with her the echo of Sophie's words at the dinner table, a small voice, clear and unwavering, declaring happiness. It was proof that healing had begun, that love had chosen to remain where it was most needed. The house, once filled with silence and grief, now held something stronger. Not perfection, not the return of what was lost, but a new foundation built on choice, on resilience, and on the quiet, stubborn power of staying.